Welcome back to the Black Sportswoman, where Black history meets women's sports. And today, for our video, we have Dr. Javier Wallace joining us. And hello, doctor. I know I keep emphasizing the doctor, but it's very exciting that you are a doctor now. How are you doing?
Hey, Bria, thank you for having me on. And I am Dr. Javier Wallace. You can still call me Javier. I'm not caught up there yet, at least. And hopefully will never be. But yes, I am doing fine. Did just graduate from the University of Texas with my PhD. So that is an added 3 letters at the end or additional 2 at the beginning that I will accept. So thank you.
So, can you just briefly introduce what your topic of study is especially what you got your PhD in?
Yeah, great question. So I'm broadly speaking, overall, what I really look at deeply from a research standpoint are Black athletes, particularly from the Latin American context. However you choose to define that, because I don't even think there is a real definition of Latin America at this point in time. But I emphasize in my dissertation, more currently writing, well, through my dissertation on basketball trafficking, or human trafficking in U.S. high school basketball, using the F1 student visa with Black international, particularly those from Latin America, and how the U.S. immigration system, along with the NCAA in the athletic industrial complex of the global scene, work together to recruit, bring, and sometimes exploit and render young people, Black young people, into precarious situations where their migratory status is used as a tool to make their lives complicated. So that's at a very broad perspective in Black athletes. And I do a lot of human making projects, I would say, with football as well too, or in other sports.
So, before we get too deep in our conversation, um, Dr. or Javier and Dash, they have the summer school. It's like Black history or Black Latin American history and contemporary topics, and that's going on this week or from July 6th to July 15th. There's 4 different classes. You can still sign up. It's very affordable, and I did the spring course, and I highly recommend it.
Thank you.
Highly recommend it. So, what is your favorite Black sportswoman story from the region?
Oh, wow. I don't even know if I would ever have enough time to prepare for this answer and like only give one, because I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about which story for me really resonates the most and I really like. And I want to say all of them, but because I can't do all of them today, I think I'm gonna have to go with Delmira Pierce. Delmira Pierce is a Black woman, a Black Panamanian woman who is well into her hundreds and is still alive and has literally been through a lot of different periods in the world that we're currently in. They called her a ciclón de Caribe, or the cyclone of the Caribbean, because of her basketball skills. I love her story because the adversity that she encountered as a Black Panamanian woman at a time where Panama was not allowing Black people, particularly those of West Indian descent, that means they came from their parents came from the Caribbean, mostly the English-speaking Caribbean islands, was not allowing these people to represent the country. And she felt the effects of that and was not allowed to represent the country. And when the country was losing and called upon her to come, she refused. She refused to do it. And I also like her connection to the 1938 Central American Caribbean Games, or 1936. I'm blanking on the date, but I think it's 38. And she participated in those games and helped Panama win one of its first gold medals in those regional games. But what I really appreciate about that story is how she demonstrates this diaspora making of Black people, because she's coached by John Yancey, who is an African-American man who plays in the Negro Leagues baseball and plays for the Harlem Renaissance, one of the first Black professional basketball teams, who's recruited to Panama to teach the coach the Panamanian basketball team. And she's one of his students, and he wants to take her to the United States, but she's like, I don't want to leave my country. But I love her her story because not only does she take a stance against anti-Black racism in her country, but she also is helping us to understand the importance of Black diaspora making with these different populations, and just how historically, kind of like you're mentioning, is like the people before, like the people that we all come to love and know right now, what they were doing before in ways that we don't know about because Black history hasn't been valued. And I find most of these stories about these individuals in Black-owned newspapers of the 1930s, the 1940s, the 50s, and not like the mainstream newspapers, but the Black-owned ones are the ones who are telling this story. And I love how Delmira, she comes up in that story. And then she starts like athletic programs and is a PE teacher in Panama, and she's still alive. Like she's like 109 or something like that, and alive, like alive. That'd be crazy too.
That's so, I mean, the story hasn't published yet, but I was just finishing up a story on Carlota Gooden, and I'm like, wait, so she's still alive too, 85, and I'm like, so two things you brought up that I think there were topics that you and Dash in y'all's course introduced me to, but also things that I find super fascinating. I think the first one was specifically the anti-West Indian Panamanian races, like that specific demographic, because of, so I was talking about Carlota Gooden in the 1952 team that was trying to go, and then the country didn't want to pay, but then in the newspaper, so I don't have access to the Black newspapers because I'm not in school. I'm just kind of like, can I get this? No. But the newspaper was cited as what the government said, and the government was like, oh, economic reasons or like money. But then you realize, oh, they were all Black. They were all Black. So I find that interesting. So you were saying, so Carlota Gooden eventually competed, but I find it interesting that she's like the first woman to represent Panama, but like, was she actually considered a citizen in Panama?
Yeah, there's an academic, and I think her name is Kat Arrell, who writes this academic piece about Carlota Gooden. But one thing that I find interesting about Carlota Gooden is, number one, you often see her name as Charlotte Gooden, which speaks to the Panamanian context and the Central American context and West Indian people coming into this region and the things they have to encounter, including this anti-Blackness that manifests itself in this Hispanic form, where there's people like even myself who has the last name Wallace, which comes from Panama. For a long time, my dad told me, for people to pronounce their names right, they would have to say Wayase, because in Spanish, the two L's make a Y sound, and Wallace has two L's, because I will blow you away if I let you see how Panamanians write Wallace on paper. Walas. Wallace. I mean, because that's how it phonetically sounds, right, in Spanish language. And usually, like, when people talk with me and I have to tell them in Panama that my name is Wallace, and like, Wallace, como William Wallace, corazón valiente. And that means they're like, oh, like William Wallace from Braveheart. Like, oh, that Wallace. I'm like, yes, William, Braveheart, yeah, that one. So you see a lot of this happening, and sometimes violently so. Black people that are of the West Indies that are migrating to Panama, establishing themselves in Panama, laboring in Panama, and then having to conform, or sometimes being forced without their permission to be Hispanicized. So in most of the West Indian, in her school books, she's Charlotte Gooden and not Carlota. And that's important to note, because Panama had a very specific anti-Blackness that was scapegoated on the West Indian population because they were the easiest to attack. And people could get away with lies about anti-Blackness, just say, no, it's not about Blackness or race, it's about culture. And it's about these people coming to take our job. No, it was anti-Blackness, right? So my dad and my uncles and aunts, they actually were Charlotte Gooden's students at Rainbow City High School, but they don't know her as Gooden. They know her as her married name is Phipps. Because I came back to the yearbooks and I found her in the 1970s when my dad and his siblings were in high school. And I'm like, oh, do you know this person? They're like, yes, that's Miss Phipps. And I'm like, oh, that's Charlotte Gooden. And like, we don't know that she run track. Like they didn't remember or know that she was a pretty high profile athlete at the time. They just knew her as their PE teacher in Panama and in the former U.S. Canal Zone. So I think, that's important to know that in many cases we had that issues with Black people in Panama of West Indian descent in the 1952 team that you talk about, with Charlotte Gooden supposed to be on that 1952 team. You usually see this anti-Blackness read in Panama through people's names, like we're talking about, because it wasn't only Charlotte Gooden. It was Cyril McSween. It was Frank Prince. It was, I'm not blanking on anything, but all of them have very distinct West Indian, if you will, Anglophone names. And to this day, people in Panama like myself, you can identify us by our last names. And that comes with a lot of othering too. So Charlotte Gooden, she definitely comes into helping us understand when with the author Kat is bringing up, is she a citizen or not? I always think that she is a citizen of the Republic of Panama, but Panama's being so anti-Black and anti-West Indian that many West Indians in the 1940s were denationalized. If they were born to Black parents that spoke English, they were no longer citizens of the country. My grandparents, who were in their 90s, both still alive, went through that period because they were Black foreigners in Panama. And, Panama has to reconcile with this fact of this large population that are doing good athletically because of the institutions that these Black people create out of this hostile environment that they're in, now on the verge of representing the country. So the country has to make a decision. What do we want to send to the world? We can either win gold medals and have people think we're a Black nation, or we can just not send them and lose. And, sometimes they chose that. They chose to lose and not have that representation out in the world. And Charlotte Gooden is that embodiment. And they'll lie. They'll say it was economic. That's a lie. It wasn't about money. Y'all didn't want to have those Black kids with those West Indian last names that spoke English and Spanish probably representing your country. You don't want that. They don't want that.
Something I find extremely fascinating as I've only been doing the history kind of research, not specifically just interviewing people about what's happening now, maybe for 6 months. And the reading between the lines of I had when I first saw that about them saying it was about money, it's you just know, but then I'm how do I actually find somebody that has said this? But because I'm I know it's racist and it's not just money. But yeah, I find that interesting. And that's why I'm glad I can talk to people like you. I'm oh, I was wondering about the Charlotte, the name thing too. And that's, so before I freak out about all this awesome information, I did want to ask you too about the diaspora making, because I think that's really you talked about Delmira Pierce and then also Carlota, and she went to Tuskegee, and then the people on the 1952 team, there were, I think one went to Sam, can't remember his last name, went to Morgan State, and specifically in the Panamanian context about this diaspora making, especially during that time period.
One, you can say Charlotte because her name is written down, and I very rarely, if ever, if I'm being honest, outside that academic article, saw that young woman referred to as Carlota. I see it mostly as Charlotte.
Let me show you this, because I have a sticky pads, and I wrote her name down as Charlotte, and I'm wait, wait, this is wrong.
No,
but it's not okay.
Wrong. It's not wrong. It's not wrong at all. And, you know, as I answer your question, I think it goes into the statement that I want to make is historically, we see this over time where many people of West Indian descent, in attempts to better integrate into Panamanian society, are using Hispanicizing their names for interest, because Panama, to be Black in Panama does not mean you're not Panamanian. To be Black and English speaking in Panama historically meant that you were other, you know. So like in the time of my grandparents, you know, that are the first people born in Panama to primarily West Indian parents from Jamaica, from Barbados, you know, a lot of them have very strong English first names: Gertrude, Alice, Alaric, Charlotte, Mabel. And I'm telling you, all real people that I'm related to's names. But then as they live in Panama, come up in Panama, and like my dad, born in the 1950s, they all start having these very Hispanic names: Ernesto, Javier, Rogelio, Miguel, Rosario, Maria. You know, they have, and I think they use it strategically to think about how can they interact with this society that they're a part of, and trying to understand how they're going to be a part of society. So, you know, I don't know if it's really Charlotte or Carlota, but I've seen Charlotte, and I'm going to respect Charlotte because I understand the context of it all, and how she literally could be Charlotte at home and have to be Carlota in the streets because of people's refusal to recognize her as a West Indian being, or hell, just to get a cup of coffee today and they want to know what your name is. I'm Carlota, so you can get out of my face and I can get my coffee and go about my business. And I think, you know, that lends itself into the diaspora making there, because these people were multicultural. You know, they are born to people from different backgrounds, coming from islands. Not everybody came from the British colonies. There were people that came from the French colonies that spoke French, from Martinique, from Haiti, people that came from even the United States. And then these people, they're coming to Panama, they're working in Central America and other countries as well, not only in Panama, but we're talking about Panama. They come to Panama, they're working there, you know, they built the canal, they built the railroads, they bring the country to modernity, basically, and many of them are feeling like not leaving. Part of it because they need labor to continue operating these projects that are there, but people have built families literally in these spaces. Like my great-grandfather, he came from Jamaica, but he married a Black woman from Panama. You know, so then my grandmother, they enter into this space being Black kids that are bicultural, because their mother is English, Spanish speaker, their father refuses to speak Spanish, and they're living in a Panamanian school. They're going to Panamanian schools in the Republic where they're learning Spanish, but then the father makes sure that they go to English school and learn English. So my grandparents, they're bilingual, not only just verbally, but they can read, write English and Spanish good because their parents felt it necessary to be. So these people are they're very multicultural beings. They speak multiple languages. You know, they can speak English, they can speak Spanish, some can speak French. You know, and then there's the U.S. presence there with the Panama Canal and the military establishments that are there. So you have African Americans in this zone too. So it's like they're making music together. And one thing that I focus on, they're playing sports together. They're playing sports together. So these places like the 1938 Central American Games, that the African-American Bill Yancey is recruited to Panama to come down, you know, he's teaching these Panamanian kids, but Panama doesn't have HBCUs, but Panama is a very racist country. So there's not a lot of opportunities for Black kids or Black youth to be able to ascend to higher education, let alone play sport in colleges. So these connections that people are making are facilitating people like Carlota to go to Tuskegee or Charlotte to go to Tuskegee. And one barrier that Charlotte probably doesn't have to encounter when coming to the United States is English, because Charlotte is at this time, she's probably bilingual. She grew up speaking English because her parents are from Barbados. She's in the Canal Zone before they transfer over to a Spanish curriculum. So I know she's being educated in Spanish, in English. I know she's being educated in English, but she's probably operating in this Spanish-speaking society too. So she's multicultural, she's probably multilingual, like many. And then also, you know, at these events, the young people from Jamaica are coming, the young people from Cuba are coming, the people from Barbados are coming, from Guatemala are coming. So now they're like having these conversations. Not only are they competing against each other, but everybody's talking. And because HBCUs are really in the business of providing opportunities for Black people, and they have athletic programs, and they're in these spaces with the best athletes literally in the region, you know, without those opportunities existing for those young people in their home countries, it's literally a natural occurrence. Like, cool, y'all come up here, y'all play, y'all run, y'all, and that's how my dad got to the United States. That's how his sister got to the United States, was through those connections that they have been forming since the 30s or 20s, because of being Black and the movement that was happening in the region. So I hope that kind of got to your question there. It's LaBeach. You mentioned the LaBeach family, right? Sam LaBeach went to Morgan State, right? Sam LaBeach is Panamanian, but then his brother Lloyd LaBeach is also Panamanian, who won 2 Olympic medals. But then they have another brother, I can't remember his first name, but he ran for the Jamaican national team. So in this one family, you have Olympians for representing 2 different countries. One from Panama and the other was from Jamaica. So it just showed you how much connections these people had with each other during that time.
I was like, I feel like they would just be so hurt to see what we're saying, the diaspora wars that happen on social media like every 5 minutes. So I did want to ask you though, I feel like this is just like one of those questions that I'm like, I don't know the answer to. So I'm thinking, I really haven't. I feel like, so we talked about Charlotte and Delmira, who became PE teachers, and I think about that Peru story because that's like it's just like, oh, but they, a lot of them, Sharon Gonzalez did her thesis on the women in Congress, in the Peruvian Congress, and they were 3 of them at the time, like all 3 of them were former volleyball players. So I'm wondering, like, specifically in the Panamanian context, like, does sports have a role of like upward mobility and opportunities despite the racist society for Black women?
Most definitely. I think, you know, sport opens up doors to certain populations in ways that society just isn't ready for and largely has been resistant to. You know, so you see, like Sharon in the Peruvian context, which is no different from the other contexts, you know, Black people are participating in sport despite the feelings about Black people in the country, but people are like turning these blind eyes because they're worried about the glory of the country. They'll deal with the Black part later, but right now we want to win. And so, you know, we do move into these points of having social mobility because of our athletic abilities. And unfortunately, sometimes it is some of the only instances where Black people can excel to the level of representing the country, or representing communities because of their athletic abilities. Whereas in other areas of their lives, the society would not care about the things that they do. And, you know, like even the Cuban context with Las Morenas de Caribe, like one of the best volleyball teams in history as we know it to this day, you know, even those women, many of those women have excelled to representing their countries in places outside of sport. And I'm not Cuban, so I can't say it's only because of their involvement in sport that they were able to get there. But if Sharon's research is in the indicator, which I think it is, by the way, in the indicator, we know largely it's because of the labor they put forth on those volleyball courts that make people give them some type of credibility and respect. And I don't think they become any smarter or any more capable of representing a community or a country because they can they can spike a volleyball good or block it. But unfortunately, because the way people think about Black people and have us in certain positions, it is the unfortunate only way, or one of the limited ways, for those women to be in those spaces.
That's so true. And it's so infuriating, but you kind of summed up my thoughts on that. Like, it's like the limited way, but it shouldn't be because I don't know. Oh, it's so frustrating. But I really hope I'm trying to find somebody from or in Cuba, and of course like a volleyball player from Cuba to talk to. So anybody,
that would be amazing.
yeah, like anybody listening, if y'all know, I know there's the subtitles are in Espanol, so please let me know. But yeah, I really yeah, hoping to, and we also have a conversation with a person from Nigeria as well. So we're really trying to like reach across the diaspora. So if you have any regions you specialize in, definitely let me know. I guess I've already kept you for 30 minutes. Is there anything I forgot to ask you specifically about Panama? Because this has definitely, but in a great way, turned into like our Panama episode.
Well, I mean, I can extend it a little bit more to like Costa Rica and add this, because another person who I've been thinking about and probably should have talked about at the beginning, but I only could give one, is Jean Robotham. Jean Robotham in Costa Rica, you know, the first woman who is Black to represent Costa Rica in the Olympics in 1968 in Mexico City. She lives here in the United States. She lives in Jacksonville right now. She goes on to create Costa Rica's physical education program at the college level. And I really like her story because it's very similar to the Panamanian context. She is the descendants of Black, what they call in Costa Rica, Afro-Caribbean or West Indian laborers who migrate to Costa Rica to labor in Costa Rica, stay in Costa Rica, are limited to a geographical location largely in Costa Rica in very anti-Black ways. And they're not nationalized until 1948, allowed to naturalize as citizens of the country until 1948, even though many of their descendants have been in the country since the 1870s. And this is not even including Costa Rica's colonial history of enslavement of African people. But Jean Robotham, why I appreciate her story and as it relates to Panama and representation, because this woman in the famous 1968 Olympics in Mexico City that we call the Black Power Olympics, being the first woman and being Black on top of that, of West Indian or Afro-Caribbean descent from Costa Rica, running in that race is a protest and an act of resistance in itself. People that have been forced to not have a citizenship in this country, this woman just being there as the face of the nation with all of the baggage that comes with being a Black person and Black woman of Afro-Caribbean descent, being there, in my estimation, is just as strong as John Carlos and Tommy Harris's Black Power fist. It's just as strong as that notion, because Costa Rica, like their neighboring countries, have intentionally blocked people, like they did Delmira, like they did Charlotte Gooden, block people because of their Blackness and heritage from being on those stages. And she is there, and she's alive, and she's done amazing things. So I think that's important to note. And I would add that, talking about Panama, that it's not just the Panamanian context, but it's many of these contexts where you see very similar things happening. And like you said, we just haven't really heard the stories, but that's why you're here.
That's why we're here, because there's so much stuff I promise I learn a new thing every day. Like the Panama citizenship, U.S. canal, like all that stuff. Yesterday I was like, what the hell? Like, I promise. I'm like, I think I told you that before. I'm like, that's so messed up. Like the contrast of like her being the first woman to represent Panama. I have just so many thoughts about like nationalism and the Olympics, and just like, especially for like Black people or Afro descendants especially in the Americas, like it's just so many feelings. And I'm like, I don't think 90% of them are not good.
You're right. They're pretty loaded issues. I mean, you know, we're really forced, we're forced to carry the weight of the nation, but the nation don't care nothing about us. Unless it's, you know, if it's time for the win, we coming out. But outside of that, there's no real investment nor care about our livelihood, our beings, or our person. And I think, we see that best represented every 4 years in the Olympics, primarily in these teams, these delegations that these countries put together, which in many cases, depending on the sport, look nothing like the people who lead the country. Nothing. And it's like, so why do we only are able to occupy these spaces where we have to use our bodies? And I'm pro use your body. Do what you want to do. Play football, play soccer, play volleyball, do you. But is that like with Sharon's research with the Peruvian women? Is it only because they can spike a volleyball good that they then are credible enough to represent the country? And I think it's insidious the way that it works out. I think it's insidious.
Well, fingers crossed that we get Sharon or anybody from, I'm trying to get someone from like every country. Why not just go for it, honestly? I think that is all the questions I had for you. I know we could, I definitely could talk to you all day. Oh, I did want to, before we go, can you talk to me a little bit about more of the work you're doing, and plug anything anybody can help out with, especially the youth teams?
Oh yes. I'll just talk about the youth teams. Asociación Deportiva Curundú is a youth community grassroots created soccer club in Curundú, which is a predominantly Black and indigenous community in Panama City, highly marginalized, intentionally so, by Panamanian government and society. These young people have come together to create their own community around the sport of football or soccer, where they teach each other about literally how to be good people. And they go against so many of the grains that aim to keep them in very subjugated places. And they're so much concerned about their personhood, for both young women and for both girls and boys, because they're kids. So they definitely need support, because they don't get support from any government entity. Not all, but the vast majority of the support that they get comes from the efforts of Afro-Latinx Travel and the donations that we solicit and receive from our wonderful followers that support our mission through social media. And we fund them to get uniforms, to play in leagues, to get transportation, to get water. All the basic essentials into the most elaborate things of participating in sport. And it's hard to get young girls to participate for many reasons that I won't go into right now, but we do have a girls team, and they need support. They need a lot of support. They need a lot of support. But please, through any of the platforms, Black Austin Tours, Afro-Latinx Travel, or my personal page, or Dash Harris Machado's personal pages, you can all find these links to support these efforts.
Yes, and then I'll link everything in the description as well, and it'll go out to our newsletter. Thank you for talking to me. I thought this was great, and I'm gonna have so much more to research now, so I'm just excited. So thank you for joining the Black Sportswoman.
Oh no, thank you for having me, and thank you for the work you're doing. It's amazing and much needed.